So we're discussing a failure to fire type malfunction. The leading cause that I've observed is operator level error. We forget to actually put a round in the chamber, therefore it goes click when we thought it was going to go bang. Now on the range, this can be a little bit humbling. It should be a learning moment. However, if we're doing this in our daily carry, remember that round ought to be in the chamber. So whatever technique you use to load the gun needs to be consistent, and every single time it needs to result in a round in the chamber. If you refer back to the previous video on my recommended technique for loading the handgun, you'll always have a round in the chamber. So if it goes click instead of bang, the leading cause I have observed is there's not a round in the chamber. Getting a round in the chamber tends to correct that issue. Other things that could cause a click instead of a bang is if the primer on the back of your round is a dud. If the firing pin of the striker hits the primer, it makes a dent, but it doesn't set the round off, then it's just an error in manufacturing. While I've seen that this is kind of rare, it does happen. With factory ammunition, depending on the manufacturer, their quality controls, you may experience this more than you should. For our self-defense ammunition, that's why it's very important that we use a reputable brand that has a history of proven performance. Other things that could cause the gun to go click instead of bang would be firearms related, meaning that there's an issue with your gun. If you're not maintaining it properly, if you're over lubricating certain portions, then it can cause the firing pin channel, the firing pin spring, things like that to get gummed up. Stuff builds up in there, and instead of the firing pin hitting with the force it should, it kind of has a muted effect, or it doesn't even protrude at all, or something could be broken. So those are the typical reasons for a click instead of a bang, or what we'll refer to here as a failure to fire. So now let's discuss the difference between the slingshot technique and the overhand technique. When I say slingshot technique, I'm describing holding the gun in our strong side hand and using the support thumb and index finger to grasp the slide back near the rear sight where the serrations are. We're grasping it with our support side thumb on the strong side of the gun, meaning for a right-handed shooter, your left thumb will be on the right side of the gun and your left side index finger will be grasping on the left side of the gun. We're going to pull back as far as the slide will go. Once we hit the furthest motion, we're going to continue the rearward motion with our hand until the slide slips from our fingers. It's important that we let the slide go using the recoil spring to slam the action back into battery. Into battery means it is fully closed and we don't have any gap. If the gun is not into battery, it's designed so it will not fire. That is a safety design. We don't want hot gases and stuff coming out of places where it's not supposed to. So, overhand technique, we're grasping the slide towards the rear. We're pulling back and continue pulling back until the slide slips from your fingers, letting it slam forward under its own spring strength. The overhand technique, we're going to still maintain a good grip with our strong side hand, but we're reaching over the rear of the slide with our support hand, meaning the meaty portion at the base of your thumb will be on the support side for a right-handed shooter, and we're curling the fingertips over onto the right side of the gun to grasp the rear of the slide. Note with both the slingshot and overhand technique, we are never ever covering up any portion of the ejection port. I refer to this as we never occlude the airway. If we cover this up in either technique, what we'll do is inhibit whatever we're trying to get out of the chamber or that's mucked up inside the slide. It will fall back into the action, resulting in a double feed condition. We don't want that. That is no bueno. So, overhand technique, we're coming across the top, we're pulling back, and in the same fashion as a slingshot, we continue that motion rearward until it slips from our fingers and let the slide slam forward. With either of these techniques, it is important to have an angle on that ejection port so that whatever is in there can fall out via gravity. If I'm using the overhand technique, I'm coming to the rear, bringing this into my workspace, and I'm angling the gun somewhat downward and letting it release so that whatever is in it falls to the ground. If I'm using the slingshot technique, then I'm from full extension, grasping the rear of the slide, and as I turn the gun inboard, I'm racking and flipping it. Now notice, this is what I refer to as coming full gangster plus a degree or two. If your ejector inside the gun is damaged, it may not fling that round out or the empty casing out, so we need to give it a little bit of assistance, and we're going to give it a vigorous flip so that that inertia will allow the round or whatever's in to fling out. Now, here's where some may agree or disagree. My preferred technique for fixing malfunctions is the slingshot technique. We'll go into by the numbers here in a minute, but from full extension, all we have to do is flip the gun on axis to fix the problem, and then we're right back on the threat. This is about a half a second faster than bringing it back here into our workspace with the overhand technique. I maintain that this is faster. However, if your hand strength or upper body strength or the position you find yourself in this encounter precludes you from using the slingshot technique, then by all means we need to be fluent with the overhand technique. The other argument against the slingshot technique versus the overhand technique is that if your hands are bloody, blood is very viscous and slippery, and you might not be able to get a good grip. Again, be fluent in both techniques. If you have hunks of meat hanging from your paws and you're bloody, then either technique may be problematic. In a separate video segment, we will discuss how to clear malfunctions, conduct reloads using only one hand, because as rare as it may be, you may need those skills. We're going to start with an unloaded and cleared handgun with the slide forward. One of the things that may cause your failure to fire, especially if you've been shooting and all of a sudden it goes click instead of bang, it could be that your magazine is not fully seated. This could happen in a couple of reasons. If you did a tactical reload, remember that your full magazine is under a greater spring tension than a partial. If you did not give it a good solid seat, then you may get one round off and then it failed to cycle. I'll demonstrate what that looks like. The magazine is mostly but not all the way in the gun, and I'm going to take and cycle the gun, and you'll see that the slide is not picking up that top round, that top dummy round. Or you may have had it fully seated, and then by nature of how you're carrying the gun, especially if you're a left-handed shooter and you're carrying this on the left side of your body with, it is not an ambidextrous gun. If something touches the mag release, you bump into something, then it may stay in the gun because there's enough friction for it won't fall out, but it's not fully seated. Or if you have an oversized mag release, if your meaty, beefy hands activate that, you may be in the act of firing, bang, 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 and then the meaty portion of your hand activates the mag release, and then either you have a click instead of a bang, or your mag may just, because of the recoil, fall straight out of the gun and you're feeling a little bit silly. This has happened to me. I felt pretty dang silly. I'm going to start out demonstrating the failure to fire drill at full speed, and then we'll break it down by the numbers. And I'm starting with a cleared handgun, and I'm using dummy ammunition for the initial portion. It will culminate with demonstrating each of these live. To fix a failure to fire, we're going to stage the unloaded firearm, no dummy round in the chamber, magazine with dummy rounds not fully seated for the initial go around. The first thing you always want to do is take your finger off the trigger. We're going to start this from position 4 as if we're attempting to fire at the target, and it goes click instead of bang. The first thing you must do is take your finger off the trigger and place it high up onto the frame or the slide. As soon as this occurs, or simultaneous with that occurring, your support hand should come slightly below the gun, and you're going to slap up to ensure that the mag is seated. Point of caution: if the gun is smaller than your hand size and you have meat below the mag well, you're going to want to flare your pinky finger or the bottom couple fingers out so that it opens up some space. So if you slam that mag in there, you're not pinching part of the meaty portion of your hand between the base plate and the mag well. So you'll notice as I do this, because I shoot different size guns occasionally, I get into the habit of, before I do that slap, oftentimes you'll see my pinky finger jump off the gun. That's why I'm doing that. All right, so position 4, it went click instead of bang. Finger comes off the trigger, slap up on the magazine. Continue that upward motion with your support hand while simultaneously turning the gun inboard. We're going to turn it inward, what I refer to as gangster, plus a degree or two. We're going to slap the magazine, continuing upward, grasping the rear of the slide, and then while rotating it, full gangster plus a degree or two, we're going to rotate the gun while slingshotting the slide. Now note that when I slingshotted that slide, I brought my support hand straight back to my sternum. I did not bring it down here at an angle. I want economy of motion. The idea is the gun is going inboard, we're racking the slide, and then we're going to shoot that support hand right back out to that two-handed grip on the gun. So once our sights are realigned on the threat, we're ready to continue engaging. So, slowing by the numbers, magazine is not fully seated. Coming to position 4, it goes click instead of bang. Step 1, finger comes off the trigger. Step 2, support hand slightly off the gun, slapping up to ensure the magazine is seated. Remember, flare that pinky out if your hand is larger than the grip size. Simultaneously with the slap upward, I'm going to continue that motion to the rear of the slide while turning the pistol inboard. I'm going to give it a vigorous rack, ensuring that that support hand comes straight back towards my sternum. Next step, rotating the gun back on axis so it's oriented properly to the threat. Simultaneously, the support hand juts back out, reacquires its two-hand grip on the gun. If it's still a threat, still a legitimate shoot target, then I re-attempt to shoot the target. So, slap, rack, reacquire the grip. All right, so now that we've gone through by the steps or by the numbers, we're going to continue practicing that, but I do not want you to go fast. The speed that you go at needs to be only the speed at which you can do the techniques perfectly. I'll caveat that with, I do want you to do the inboard flip and the simultaneous rack of the slide at full speed. What I don't want you to myelinate is the slow release of the slide and not getting that inertia of the flip. When you slap rack, I want that rack to be at full speed, and then everything else before or after that step can be slow and deliberate. So that's the primary technique that I teach. That's the primary technique I use. The reason for that is that the gun is on axis with the threat. I'm slapping, I'm racking, and I'm quickly getting right back on orientation with the threat in case I need a follow-up shot. There's an alternate technique that is widely used, and we will discuss it because there is utility for the alternate technique. Primarily, in my mind, is if we are in a cramped space. For example, if I'm in the driver's seat of my vehicle and a threat comes up right here, and I have a malfunction while I'm squunched up in the driver's seat, then the slap rack using the slingshot technique is no bueno. So this is where I would say the alternate, what I would refer to as the alternate, would be the overhand technique. Again, we are not going to occlude the airway. We're going to come across the top of the slide, pull back, and release the slide. The other time that this may be of utility is if for some reason that round that's in the chamber is being a little bit stubborn and you don't have the upper body or the hand strength with the slingshot technique and the slide won't retract, coming back to here, some people, because of body mechanics, you can rack it a little more vigorously back here. The other reason that we would use this as our primary technique is if our gun doesn't have a very pronounced cut for the ejection port. You see on the Glock, you have 2 of the 3 sides of the slide are cut away so that it can eject the rounds. Some guns will have a very small ejection port. There'll be almost like a curved surface here at the top. If we're doing the slingshot technique, then whatever's trying to eject is just going to fall into the slide. It's going to be like falling into a bowl, and it's going to induce a double feed. So if you have that type of handgun, then scratch everything I said about the slingshot technique. Your primary ought to be what I'm referring to as the overhand technique. We're going to stage it the same way we did before with a cleared gun. Slide is going to be forward and magazine of dummy rounds, but not fully seated. The slap, rack, reacquire the grip mantra still holds true. It's just how we're doing the rack is going to change from the slingshot technique. The alternate, as I'm going to refer to it, is going to be the overhand technique. Remember we discussed with the slingshot, we needed to vigorously flip the gun inboard, gangster plus a degree or two. This time, we're able to achieve the same thing because we're pointing the ejection port down, so gravity should allow whatever's in the chamber or within the ejection port to fall freely. Note that when I'm reacquiring the grip, when I'm retracting the gun for the rack, and when I'm pushing the gun back out to represent to position 4 to reacquire the grip, I'm maintaining contact with the gun. Finger off the trigger, the slap on the way back. I'm already orienting the hand while the gun is in motion. Once I get to get to the rear, I rack it. From here, my hands, my support hand is going back to the grip of the gun, and I'm rotating back into the two-handed grip on the way back out. Slow and by the numbers, using the overhand technique for the rack. Up on target, it goes click instead of bang. Finger still comes off the trigger. We still slap up on the magazine. This time, we're going to rotate the gun outboard while grasping the rear of the slide. Once we have our strong side elbow locked into our rib cage, tight into our workspace, once we're here, we're going to rack the slide, and then we're going to immediately reorient our hands and push back out onto the target. Finger off the trigger, slap the magazine. As we're retracting it, we're grabbing the rear of the slide, not occluding the airway, locking the elbow into the rib cage, racking the slide, and then pushing the gun back out on target. Finger off the trigger, slap, rack, reacquire the grip. Finger off the trigger, slap, rack, reacquire the grip. The slide, and then pushing the gun back out on target. Finger off the trigger, slap, rack, reacquire the grip. Finger off the trigger, slap, rack, reacquire the grip. The question may arise, do I have any data as to how slow the overhand technique is versus the slingshot? No, I don't. So we're going to collect some right now. I have a magazine that's alternating dummy round, live, dummy, live, dummy, live for a total of 5 live iterations. I'm going to run the drill. The first 5, I'm going to use the slingshot technique as part of the slap rack reacquire the grip. Then I'll reset and I'll do it again 5 times on the clock using the overhand technique. Again, slingshot is grasping it from the serrations at the rear of the slide, vigorously giving it a flip to get anything that's in the ejection port flung out, and then reacquiring the grip, as opposed to bringing it back here, what I call the overhand technique, and clearing the malfunction back here in your workspace, and then reacquiring the grip on the way back out. Again, my goal is to keep all my shots on within a 6-inch group in the center of that target. Anything in the gray, I'll be okay and happy with. If it edges out into the black zone of the target, a little bit shaky there. And absolutely, if I throw anything off the target, then I'm going way too dang fast, and I don't want to, well, that's a liability that none of us should want to incur, is every round that we fire, we must be accountable for. So we don't want anything to not hit our target. No further ado. That was a 231. I bumped it on my waist. It's a little too sensitive, so now it's not showing that, but that was a 231, and it had a little bit of a cognitive delay, we'll call it. All right, we'll do this again. That was a 179. .66. .67. That was a 1.71. As far as shot placement, I'm okay with the first 4. The 5th round, I'll be honest, I did not reacquire the grip. And remember, that's one of the things that I really harp on, is reacquiring that grip as part of the drill before we re-engage. So the 5th round, it hit in the gray, but it was way 6 o'clock. Bottom line, it's not where I wanted it. So I threw that one. All right, so now I'm going to reset. I'm going to load 5 more live rounds, intermittent with dummy rounds, and now I'm going to clear it using the overhand technique. All right, so now we're going to do the overhand technique on the clock, alternating live, dummy, live, dummy, live, dummy, starting out with dummy rounds in the gun. That was a 2.64. .46. 2.45. I bumped it on my belt and it reset it. Two point 4.4. .203. So the one that was closest to 2 seconds, I'm not unhappy with the shot, but it is about 12 o'clock of my point of aim. The same as with the slingshot technique, my 5th round did not land in the cluster where I wanted it to land. So overall, we'll go back and we'll crunch those numbers. So I think there's probably about close to 3/4 of a second difference for me, but keep in mind, I use the slingshot technique as my primary. That's what I'm most fluent with. So there's a little bit of a lag time likely for me. However, I would argue that of those who use the overhand technique back in your workspace as their primary, I would challenge them to do the same drill. I'd be curious what those results would be. Coming back here has got to add at least a fraction of a second or half a second to get back out on target. Being at 10 yards, I have to apply a little bit of sight picture. It's not as intuitive as if I was at 3, 5, or even 7 yards. The further back you go, as you've learned by now, that angular deviation is going to increase at the target. You have to be more deliberate with your reacquisition of your grip and your sights the further back you are. So overall, my results from today is that, again, as I maintain, the slingshot technique is quicker to get back on target and re-engage. I do not see much of an accuracy difference between the two techniques. My shot group between the two is about the same, minus the 5th shot for both of them being off. That's on me, however, that has nothing to do with the technique.